I'm Malcolm Daniel. I'm curator of photography, and my colleagues Lisa Volpe, who's associate curator of photography, and Mariana Rail, curatorial assistant. We've all worked on the show together, so it's been a team project. How many of you remember where you were on July 20th, 1969? Yeah, okay, good. You don't remember where you were on Some hands did not go up. Yeah, obviously, we are one of many places commemorating the 50th anniversary of the moon landing, and we figured, particularly here in Houston, rather than doing just a kind of a NASA photographs show, which other places are doing. We would mine the collection to find works that had a kind of broader and, in some cases, more fun view of the moon and of space travel and such. So you'll find that there are some serious elements to the show and some that are more lighthearted. Almost everything in the show is from our own collection, and I think we call it photographs from the museum's collection, but in fact there are a few loans from Houston Public Library and from a private collector, but otherwise it's work from our own collection. And it's just these two galleries. So you'll hear these little snippets of sound that happen just every now and then. It's not a continuous audio playing, but just so that every now and then you hear the we choose to go to the moon in this century, just every now and then. And we also have the sort of broadcast from the moon going over there, and that has a little bit of sound also on the TV, which is how we all experienced it. So Lisa has made this nice little crib sheet for you that explains basic sections of the show, such as it is. And the first section being the sort of the view from Earth, sort of gazing up there and thinking about the way that the moon plays in our imagination, our sense of creativity, our sense of romance, just the beauty of looking at the moon. And so there are pictures of solar eclipses, which of course, even though it's a solar eclipse, it's about the moon that's blocking the sun for a solar eclipse. And then the great sort of classic, one of the great classic photographs of the 20th century is Ansel Adams' Moonrise, taken in Hernandez, New Mexico on November 1st of whatever year that was, 1965. Sort of that view, that the way that most of us experience the moon. Should have mentioned it at the start. When you were outside waiting, you saw the film being projected outside. That's the 1902, very, very early, 1902 film by the French filmmaker Georges Méliès called A Trip to the Moon. So it's fun to look back 100 and something years ago to the idea of sort of what space travel might be like, what people would discover if they ever went to the moon. So that's what's playing on the outside. The next little section of the show, is there anything that you want to, just interrupt me as we go if there's anything. The next little section of the show, which includes the book that's in the case, the stereo view that's in the viewer, which is a stereo view of the moon, and then the two bigger pictures in the center of the wall are about the beginning of a serious mapping of the moon. And those photographs were made in the late 19th century. The first really detailed mapping of the moon, it was a photographic atlas of the moon done from the Paris Observatory. And really until well into the 20th century, it was the most detailed and comprehensive atlas of the moon. And on the left, you'll see what the photogravures were like. I think there were something like 60 in the set. And on the right, you'll see that each of the plates actually had a kind of tissue overlay, which is and of course, that's Kennedy speaking here in Houston at Rice University, and it's actually the photograph that's to the left of these two big gravures. So I was saying that each of the plates had a tissue overlay, which are most often lost, but we have an example here where there's a kind of drawn diagram over the photograph that shows each of the craters and what they were named and such. So there's this little section of mapping the moon, and then the serious effort of the space program, and it begins with that quote you just heard from Kennedy, being part of his speech at Rice University, where he set out the goal of landing a man on the moon and bringing him safely home by the end of the decade. That picture and the next three are borrowed from Houston Public Library. Do you want to say anything about that? About those? I know that one of those is one of your favorite pictures.
So once again, we are so grateful to our friends at the Houston Public Library. The Houston Metropolitan Research Center, as it's known, houses more than 4 million photographs. Yes, you heard that correctly. 4 million photographs that kind of trace the history of Houston, and of course the space program is such a huge part of that. So when we knew we were doing this exhibition, we certainly wanted to tap into the vast archive there. And it was a tough choice, but we came out with these 4 images that you'll see on the wall here. Malcolm already mentioned this incredible picture of Kennedy making his speech, and you can see at Rice University, which our director told us yesterday, he has a feeling the stadium was built specifically to house the speech because it was completed in less than 6 months. And then preparations at NASA, and this is absolutely one of my favorite photos, and the minute I saw it, I knew we had to have it. It is 3 NASA mathematicians posed in front of one of the lunar landers that were built as testing, and they're posed with the lunar landing calculation, the actual math that slowed the lunar module from about 38,000 miles per hour to a landing speed of 2 miles per hour. This was actually the scariest and most feared moment of the mission, and this is the beautiful and elegant math and the people that completed it that got that work done.
And if anybody can understand what that math is, they're pretty amazing.
I just have a fun little story. I have a very good friend who's a theoretical physicist, and I sent this picture to him just to confirm that this was in fact the calculation for the lunar landing, and he was very sweet and was like, yes, and then tried to teach me the math involved.
Why don't you all sort of come down to this half at least? The next picture on the wall is Gary Winogrand's picture of the launch, which happened a couple of days ago, 2 days ago, I think, the launch of Apollo 11. Of course, what he's photographing is not the launch itself, but looking at everybody looking at it, everybody with their binoculars looking to the sky. And the next one, of course, before Apollo 11 could go up, they had to figure, they had to just test things and test the landing site. And so there were a number of unmanned vehicles that landed on the moon. and tested the soil and sent back something like 21,000 photographs, which came back, individual photographs, but transmitted back to Earth, and then sort of pieced together to recreate the lunar landscape there, to look for the right place to land and to see that it would be clear and to see what the soil was like. So this is part of that pre-Apollo testing. And then, of course, the NASA pictures that are the classics, and that when we think of the space program, we think of Neil Armstrong reflected in Buzz Aldrin's helmet there, or the first footprint on the moon, the lunar module itself, the picture that is popularly called Earthrise, not moonrise or sunrise, but Earthrise, the Earth coming up over the horizon of the moon. Gene Cernan's foot, the last foot to step on the moon. And then the way that most of us experienced the moon landing, watching it on TV, and some photographs shot on the TV live from the moon. Neil Armstrong climbing down the ladder, Richard Nixon speaking to the astronauts. So.
And we should add that NASA astronauts were actually trained photographers. NASA recognized the importance of photography with all of the Apollo missions and would train the photographers specifically to use cameras and how to frame and take great photographs. They knew that this was both for scientific purposes and for public outreach. So that's why some of these photos are so beautifully stunning. These were photographers and scientists both.
Last time I was watching a thing on PBS, and it was kind of a recreation of it, and they were inside, this was Apollo 11, they were inside the thing, and they wanted to take a picture, and they said, where's that Hasselblad? And it was floating around.
It was actually attached to Neil Armstrong, like once they left the Eagle, but yes, they were trained on a Hasselblad, which, if you know photography, is, it's a camera. It's something that is a serious piece of equipment, so absolutely. And then some of the more playful shots, the astronaut placing his family photo on the moon in order to kind of take his family with him. So yeah, really beautiful, right?
One of our museum supporters and a fellow who was the third generation or so photographer here in Houston, Mike Marvins. You might remember the Marvin studio up on Montrose. Mike was saying that he had taken a photograph of Gene Cernan's family that Gene Cernan left on the moon. So Mike's photography is now up there on the moon. We'll look at the photographs in this corner now.
Where did you get the vintage TV?
It was sourced for this exhibition and rigged up for us, obviously, because this generation of television did not have inputs. So we are very thankful to BAML TV here in Houston for BAML, Texas. Is that how you say it?
We went to Spring.
Oh, okay, in spring. Sorry. Thank you guys. It was their idea, their brilliant idea to put the TV in here, so we're very thankful for that. So now we've landed on the moon, and the rest of the exhibition is really about the kind of imagination and creativity that kind of incredible feat can inspire in all of us. And so these first 4 photographs are by an artist named Bill Finger, who has always been inspired by space travel and science fiction, and was listening to NPR one day about the next step in space travel, which is sending manned missions to Mars. And apparently the most effective way to do this will be just a one-way trip. Those people are going and apparently not coming back. And he was surprised at how many people who have no experience were interested in signing up for this and interested in doing this. And so it sparked his imagination about the idea of training at home for space travel. And so that's what this series is about. And if you look closely, you'll start to see that something's a little off because these are Bill's at-home little models. This lunar lander that you see here is actually this. This is the exact thing he photographed for that picture. So he builds these little models in his basement, photographs them, so nothing that you see here is really more than this big. Two photos that kind of talk about, again, that imagination and how we think of it here in our hometown as Houston, the space city. So these students outside watching a solar eclipse and just being, you know, having that impression and that moment. And then a photograph by a Japanese photographer who really has found a way to combine what Houston is perhaps best known for, space and cowboys, all in the same frame.
And then let's move into the next room. The centerpiece of this room is, in fact, a genuine NASA-related picture. The rest of the room is more about imagination, this seemed like the perfect place to put this picture, just in terms of drawing you into the room. It's a new acquisition for us by the German photographer Thomas Struth. He's one of the key photographers of the late 20th century and 21st century. German photographer, part of what we call the Dusseldorf School. Thomas Struth, Thomas Roof, Andreas Gursky. Thomas's work was the inaugural exhibition at the Moody Center about 2.5 years ago. And when he came to Houston to install that show, he got permission to photograph at Johnson Space Center. And so what you're looking at here is a full-scale mock-up of the American section of the International Space Station, submerged in a 40-foot deep, 6 million gallon swimming pool. It's what they call the Neutral Buoyancy Lab. It's where the astronauts train to work in a weightless environment. Happens to be underwater rather than out in space, but that's how they train. And so you're looking at the space station, and it's hard to know, it's appropriately hard to know what's up. It's almost like it's in space. I mean, up is really this way, right? He's up on the ceiling looking straight down into the pool, and these white dots that you see, rather like if you look at the picture of the footprint, it's the photo mural at the beginning, you'll see these little crosses, those sort of things to help you measure the space. Those white dots, those are actually the lights on the ceiling reflected on the surface of the water. But I like that it echoes that sort of measuring aspect of the NASA photographs. So it's just, I think, a kind of mesmerizing, glowing photograph. The other pictures in here are a little more removed from NASA, but more about imagination. Some of you will remember the David Leventhal show from a few years ago, and the series that he did about space, going back to his sort of childhood toys and thinking about the way they triggered his imagination about space travel. Similarly, in the corner over here, you'll see sort of space rides and such, the way it engages children and adults. Here, a series of paper moon photographs where it was popular to to go to the photo studio and sort of sit there on a paper moon. Lisa, what are the dates of these? Do we know the date range? So, not so different than the Georges Méliès film Outside. Have we shown this before? So unless you're part of museum collectors, you might have seen it there. It's a picture by a Swiss duo, Cortis and Sonderegger, who recreate famous photographs. So this is perfect for all of the visitors who will come here and are skeptical about whether the moon landing was real or faked, right? What they've done is to take that famous photograph, which is our photo mural at the entrance, and they've said, well, okay, let's try to remake that. And they show us how they've done it. The bags of cement, the foam core fake shoe here to make the imprint, all of the things, here are those little crosshair things that they're going to put on the photograph as the measuring. And this is what they do. There are sort of many classics of photography where they've taken a famous photograph and then they've recreated it in their studio. And they show us all of the things that were involved in making it, the cement, the pebbles, everything. And even it's just, we questioned, since they usually say everything is shown, well, what about the lights? And it turns out they placed it in their studio in a way so that the light coming through the window at a certain time of day would recreate the light conditions that are part of that picture that you see front. The picture at the other end of this wall is another one that you might remember from the exhibition for a New World to Come that Yasu Nakamori did a few years ago of Japanese photography. This by Hitoshi Nomura, who for something like 20 years, every night would photograph the moon. He would take a roll of film of a musical staff, the lines, and then he would rewind it and shoot the moon. And it would be chance exactly where the moon hit on this, and he called it a kind of a moon score, like a musical score. And even in the exhibition, there was a record and a recording because he got musicians to then play the sound that would have been made by this kind of chance double exposure of the moon and the staff. The screen here is work. Again, you might have seen, it was in Alison Green's show called Digital Worlds about a year ago, maybe. It's an artist that Lisa worked with at her previous position in Wichita, an artist named Cassandra C. Jones. And she has sourced all of the photographs that you see from the internet, from just people's snapshots around the world as you see it. And it's called Wax and Wane, and you'll see that the moon arcs across the screen and goes through all the phases of the moon as it goes. And so it's the view from everywhere in the world, and she's lined up each of those pictures so that the moon itself is always in the same place. Well, moves slowly across the screen. How many pictures are there? You remember? Does it say on the label? Does it say? No? Okay. Yeah, 900 or so. You got anything more to say to people? Mariana, any other thoughts? No? Do you have questions? It's meant to be a kind of fun show, and it's up not really long. It's only up till September 2nd because we had to wait until Van Gogh was out, and then there's something else coming in, and this was the available spot, and the timing was great because although we're going to open it this evening, it officially opens on Saturday, which is the anniversary of the moon land. So This is a couple minutes. I mean, you're seeing most of it right now. There, now it starts over again. Were there other questions? Questions or thoughts? And this gallery back there will be dark and blocked off. They need access to it right now for all of the equipment related to the Ranja Kjartansson show, which is in the other half of these galleries. And so that's going to be just roped off like that. The door block will be there, and the gallery will be dark, so hopefully people won't wander in.
That other half is what the training will be on tomorrow.
Okay, well, I think we're good. Thanks, yeah.